Salam world, I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and we finally reached the final series of Deltora Quest, which is kind of bittersweet. So the series is called The Dragons of Deltora, and today we're going to be starting off with the first book in the series, Dragon's Nest. Now that our trio have actually freed Deltora and rescued all the Deltorians from the Shadowlands, it's finally time for them to deal with the aftermath of having been ruled by the Shadow Lord for so long. Unfortunately, Deltora is on the verge of famine. Food is very scarce, crops are failing, and the seas are empty of fish. Not to mention that trade was completely halted with Deltora during the time of the Shadow Lord, so there's no way of them bringing anything new. Now, Leaf has to basically reinstate Deltora on the international map in hopes of importing some kind of goods to support his people, as well as find a way to make the land healthy again so that they could grow proper crops and be able to sustain themselves until trade kind of starts up again. But of course, the Shadow Lord ain't gonna make it that easy. So in each of these stories, we kind of discuss how the Shadow Lord uses other people's grievances to prevent progress in Deltora. It shows us how victimhood can consume an individual to the level of betrayal. And so essentially in each book, we're going to be introduced to a new set of challenges that our trio have to face, as well as an antagonist that the Shadow Lord has preyed on so that they could betray their king. And in this book, we're going to start with the victimhood of the Capricorns. But if you're only here for the book review, then you can go to the time shown on the screen right now, or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk story. Dragon's Nest starts off with Leaf, Barda, Jasmine, and Doom trying to destroy the Shadow Lord's Palantir. They've started up a really large furnace to try and melt this glass ball, as well as destroy the table that it is embedded in. And as they are doing that, they hear the Shadow Lord's voice come through, speaking of a plan involving 4 sisters, which are actually poisoning the land of Deltora, preventing it from being able to grow anything sustainable, hoping that eventually he'll slowly kill the people of the land itself. Now, the 4 Sisters is a tale that the Jawless used to tell. There was an island where 4 sisters live, and they had such beautiful voices. One day a stranger came along and he absolutely hated their singing, so he put each of the 4 sisters in one of the corners of the island. However, even when they were apart, they still continued to sing. In this instance, the song of the 4 sisters was Poison. Trying to find any clues about what these 4 sisters are and where they can find them, Jasmine finds a torn piece of a map inside the leg of the table. This map indicated that a sister, the sister of the East, was located in a place called Dragon's Nest. And so they were thrown into another quest, looking for these 4 sisters and attempting to destroy them. However, the belt wasn't enough to destroy these sisters. They needed stronger power, a power that was removed before the placement of the 4 sisters during the time of King Lucan by the chief advisor Drum. Dragons. Before Arden had dreamt up the belt and united the 7 tribes, Deltora was known as the Land of the Dragons, where they were considered the keepers and protectors of the land. Now, the inhabitants did fear dragons because why wouldn't they? But they respected the necessity of them for Deltora to stay alive. And eventually, when the huge event of the seabed collapsing, which brought Pera and Deltora together, the Shadow Lord had now found a new endeavor to try and conquer the land of the dragons. However, the Emerald Dragons along the boundary of the territory were not going to let that happen. Barely escaping with his life, the Shadow Lord had to find a way to get rid of dragons before he had any chance of getting into Deltora. And so he bred the Akbabas, 7 predatorial birds with the aim to make dragons extinct. And unfortunately, they were succeeding. These beasts became endangered to the point where the great explorer Doran had to go to the last surviving member of each different kind of dragon and tell them to go into a deep sleep, telling them that they will be awoken by the king that needs them and when the land will finally be safe. It was only after this event that the Shadow Lord was actually able to cross the border in the Battle for Deltora. Now, that is a story for when we're going to be talking about Arden, but basically, long story short, the Shadow Lord is terrified of dragons and is unable to surpass their strength. And that's why our trio need them to destroy these four sisters. And if you remember from the last series, they had already met a dragon, the dormant topaz dragon in the Osmine Hills. So, under the guise that the king is going to be touring the kingdom, they went to the Osmine Hills to wake up the dragon. Now, there was only one problem that they weren't counting on. These dragons are super territorial, and so one of the promises that they had made to Doran and Doran to them is that if they ever do wake up whilst another is still asleep, no dragon would cross into the territory of another. And given that Dragon's Nest is actually in the Ruby territory, the Topaz Dragon can't help our trio. Instead, they have to wake up the Ruby Dragon when they get into the Ruby territory. Now, this is when they find that there is a Capricorn captured by the Granus. Now, this Capricorn's name is Rolf, and he's pretty much a coward. Even when Leafbart and Jasmine were trying to help them, he would be screaming and making a fuss to the extent that the Granus discovered their location. It was only due to the help of the Topaz Dragon that they even made it out alive. And Capricorns, boy, do they hate dragons. Capricorns have lived in Deltora since the ancient times. However, at the moment, they are endangered. They used to live in a city called Capra, a beautiful pink city on the east coast. They were so enthralled by its beauty and did everything in their power to make the city more beautiful, to make their lifestyle more luxurious. Unfortunately, one of the things that they would do is steal the eggs of ruby dragons. They would suck them dry and use the shells as lanterns. 3 times the ruby dragons would warn them against this behavior, saying that if they do it again, they would come and destroy Capra. But of course, the Capricorns did not give a damn, and so the ruby dragons did enact on their promise and destroyed the city. The leftover Capricorns all ran away to the forest and lamented their loss. After a few years or decades, the people of Broome built their city on top of the ruins of Capra, and it became one of Deltora's most prominent fishing cities. As a consequence of the people of Broome building the city on top of Capra, Capricorns don't like them very much. But anyways, the trio take Rolf in hopes that they would be able to return him safely to his home, but there seems to be someone trying to sabotage their path. There were a few instances where they almost met their end, and so Leafbart and Jasmine decided to part ways with the Royal Guard, hoping that they would be able to take Rolf to safety while they headed secretly to Dragon's Nest to destroy the Sister of the East. And the way that they were going to do it, cross through the Forest of Silence. Now, while they were there, they did notice that they were being followed. And so, Jasmine being Jasmine, she managed to throw this person off their scent. And they ended up in the orchard of the Orchard Keeper. They indulged themselves with the beautiful fruits, not knowing that this will lead them into a deep paralysis. But luckily for them, Lyndall comes and saves the day. She had been the one stalking them, and when Jasmine put her off the trail, they were this close to being eaten. After saving their life, Lyndall tells them the unfortunate news that the Royal Guard had been completely destroyed by fire, with reports of a red dragon having caused the chaos. Now, of course, this absolutely freaked out Leaf, because as soon as they went into the Ruby territory, he kind of called upon the Ruby Dragon, hoping that they would be able to meet them later in Dragon's Nest. He really didn't think that the dragon would wake up and kill humans. They end up telling Lyndall about their quest, and the four of them all head to Dragon's Nest. When they get there, they find Rolf in the nest.
That's suspicious.
Now, Leaf thinks that Rolf may be the meal of the Ruby Dragon, whereas Barda thinks that this could be bait by the Sister of the East. But regardless, they're gonna go and save Rolf either way. Rolf is absolutely disgusted that he had just been saved by a lady from Broome, aka Lyndall. And he will spit in lines until Barda gets in and protects his lady. Spoiler alert. Barda and Lyndall have a thing going this entire book, which eventuates. She even has a nickname for him, Old Bear, which is kind of sweet. But going back to the important stuff, Rolf ends up running away because he's an absolute coward, and when they're trying to figure out what to do next, a ruby dragon comes and tries to kill them. Lyndall manages to injure the dragon. Unfortunately, he burns her, and Barda be like... But honestly, he didn't have time to kind of process everything because the Ruby Dragon was back to kill him again. And just as it was gonna kill Leaf, another Ruby Dragon spawns out of the sky and destroys it. So, it turns out that the first Ruby Dragon wasn't actually a Ruby Dragon. It was Rolf. Because Rolf is actually the guardian of the Sister of the East. And he was the one who's trying to get Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine killed throughout the entire trail. And he was also the Ruby Dragon that spawned and killed the Royal Guard. Now the real Ruby Dragon comes to Leaf and they make up and they find the Sister of the East buried underneath the nest. This like yellow golden egg that is pulsating. And so, combined with the strength of the ruby on the belt of Deltora, Leaf and the Ruby Dragon managed to destroy the sister with fire. And as soon as that happened, prosperity was returned to Deltora's east. There were plentiful fish in the ocean, and crops were starting to grow again. Jasmine, being Jasmine, searches Rolf's cloak and finds the second piece of the map. Now leading them to Deltora's most north location, Shadowgate. And that's where the story ends. So of course, there is a lot to process with the story. We're getting heaps of new lore about Deltora's history and how it came to be. It doesn't seem like Deltora was exactly built on the most innocent foundations. And I mean, that's to be expected. There is no country that is built purely on goodness and mercy and peace. Things happen which lead to civilizations crumbling and others taking their place. So of course, in this particular story, the most important thing that we've got to talk about is Capra. It is essentially the controversy in the middle of this entire novel, even though, you know, the whole sister thing is the actual quest, and everybody fears dragons. So from what we know in Dragon's Nest, but also from the Secrets of Deltora written by Doran, we get a sense that Capricorns, they're not the greatest creatures. They're very arrogant and prideful. They believe that they are somewhat a superior race to everyone else and therefore need to be treated as so. They didn't believe that they could do any wrong, and so when they were destroying these dragon's eggs for their own luxuries, they didn't see that as a fault of themselves. Because they are superior to dragons. And so when the ruby dragons did end up destroying Capra, this was considered as a huge loss, and injustice acted upon them. And ever since then, now that the Capricorns live in the forest just outside of Broome, they would come out every afternoon, because that's when an illusion of Capra would glaze over the city of Broome, and they get to look upon their beloved city and mourn what they have lost. And this is a sentiment that they have passed down through the generations. Children are taught of the misjustice against their people by the dragons and by the people of Broome, who decided to build a new city on top of their ruins. And so even though Rolf never lived in Capra, never even saw the real city, only the illusions, still held that deep hatred towards the people of Broom and dragons because of something his parents, his ancestors had told him had happened. And now, another thing that you guys need to know about Capricorns is because of their pride, they never learned how to hunt or farm. Instead, they're living off the charity of the Brooms people. When the people of Broom saw that the Capricorns would come out during the afternoons, they used to lay out baskets in front of the city full of food, and the Capricorns would take this, but they would still be in disgust that they have to be fed by the people of Broom. Yet they never did anything about it to teach themselves how to hunt or farm. When Doran met the Capricorns, he said that they would either spit or throw stones at any outsider. That's how deep their vanity and arrogance goes. Now, Rolf claims that he is part of the Capra royal line, and he makes his ambitions for his peoples quite clear. They want to reclaim the city of Broom and rebuild Capra to its original glory. And it was this sentiment, his brewing hatred for the people of Broom and what their ancestors had done, as well as his need to reinstate Capricorns to the high status that they believed that they deserved, the Shadow Lord was able to creep in and promise him just that. Be the guardian of my sister, and I'll give you exactly what you want when I become the ruler of Deltora. And to prove that he was going to do exactly as he said, he gives Rolf a gift. He teaches him how to do magic, essentially. But it's kind of ironic, the type of magic that he teaches him. Despite the history that the Capricorns have with the dragons, he teaches him how to transform into one. I don't know whether this was a choice of Rolf, as in, him believing that dragons are the most destructive powers in Deltora due to what they had done to Capra, and therefore he internalizes this as if he wants to be elite, if he wants to have all the power, then he needs to resemble what is the most powerful in his eye. Or, which I kind of like this theory more, the Shadow Lord deliberately teaches him that kind of magic to, you know, it's like the troll of the century. But in all honesty, if it was or wasn't the Shadow Lord, you kind of have to give Rolf credit for his creativity with the whole plan of playing the victim as the poor Capricorn whose life had been destroyed eons ago before he was even bloody born by dragons and the people of Broom. Like, what kind of victimhood is this where you're basically taking on the suffering of generations before instead of living your own life? That's not the only genius thing that Rolf did. He would continuously play his victim card. First with the Grannis and being all cowardly so that Leaf would put himself in danger, and then expose Leaf to the Grannis so that they could be done with him. And then when that didn't work, he then started to plant seeds of doubt in Deltora by smearing the already bad reputation of dragons through his attack on the palace guards. And the really bad thing is, this smear campaign worked. Throughout the next few books, we're going to see the effects of this on Deltora as a whole. It makes Leaf doubt the dragons, their intentions and their purity about protecting their land, essentially instilling some kind of fear of them, which, if continued, would have meant that Leaf would not have been able to destroy any of the sisters. Luckily, of course, the Ruby Dragon is super wholesome and super supportive, so that was quickly nipped in the bud. But that doesn't mean that the rest of Deltora isn't going to be in absolute panic state, because there are two dragons flying in the sky. For now. The elitism that the Capricorns have bred amongst their own community, regardless of how small this actual community is, and then their lack of accountability for their ancestors' actions. Not so much that they have to pay for their ancestors' actions, but an understanding that mistakes were made on both sides, and therefore not feeling like they are victims to a grand conspiracy leads Capricorns to develop a superiority complex. And it is this superiority complex which allows them to justify any of their actions, wishing death upon themselves before ever being helped or ruled by another. And it is this superiority complex that the Shadow Lord exploits. Like, Rolf took pleasure in making Leaf save him, reminding him that even though you're the king of Deltora, I still have status. I am the Prince of Capra. Even though the city of Capra doesn't actually exist anymore, and therefore that title doesn't actually mean anything. But of course, Leaf being Leaf, he's super respectful no matter who you are and no matter what nonsense you're spewing. Look, I know that some of you are going to be able to draw parallels between Rolf's situation and something that's really been happening around the world, but this is a kid's book, so I'm not going to be doing all the parallels here. I'm sure you guys can figure that out for yourself. But even just outside what we're seeing in the real world, this is a sentiment that's been used over and over again all throughout history. It's not unique to one group of individuals, but any kind of individual that does let their pride prosper would lead this community down this particular destructive fate. And if you want any examples, I'm just going to put a whole bunch over here. So, there is some inspo here. At the end of the day, the Shadow Lord didn't really need to do anything except promise the Capricorns the future they desired. A future that their current king, or any of the kings, as a matter of fact, because the Shadow Lord was controlling their fate all the way until Leaf, could not provide. So, it was really easy for them to pick the side of betraying their country. They didn't even care about it to start off with. And essentially, the Shadow Lord had cemented his position as an ally to the Capricorns by giving them essentially the ultimate weapon in the Deltora Quest universe, magic. The power to be able to force the hands of those who wished their mission of re-establishing Capra to be harmed. So this book clearly highlights the dangers of a superiority complex, not just amongst individuals, but communities. Without a true understanding of every side of the story and being able to have empathy and sympathy for everyone, you're going to create these monsters regardless. You're going to create these monsters on the inside, and as soon as you give any form of power to that monster, you're gonna get a villain. You're gonna get betrayal. Because they're going to use whatever they disagree with in the world as a way to victimize themselves. And as a consequence of being a victim, they are justified to act in any particular way they wished, including being evil. And these are the exact ingredients that you need to breed traitors, ideologically charged terrorists, and even protectors of vileness. So the Shadow Lord got it right. But just as a reminder for us, exactly what our trio and Lyndall eventually learned from the Ruby Dragon, understanding where hate comes from doesn't justify it. You could have sympathy for their side of the story, but you really need to look at the full picture to be able to have a clear image of what is happening. You're going to have winners and losers in many situations, conquerors and victims, but at the end of the day, that's not the label or a title that sticks to an individual forever, let alone over generations. The only way that these ideas can be passed down is through teachings, whether it is the teaching of being a conqueror or being superior, or the teachings of being inferior or a victim. And when you put anyone in a box, they are not going to feel comfortable because that is not their identity. It is something that you have imposed on them, and therefore they're going to do everything in their power to resist. And this is what I like about our trio. They don't really take the history of a person in consideration as to how to treat them. They treat them based on the actions of that individual. Of course, Even though someone may be acting in an unpleasant manner, they keep their judgments reserved, presenting themselves with kindness, but an increased sense of caution depending on how far those actions go. And I think that's the right way to treat people. Base it on their actions, not the group that they identify with or what they believe about themselves, because that's not always reflected in the reality. This series in general provides us with a lot of new Deltora lore, which helps us to understand the origins of many of our minor characters, including how different groups formed and how they were victimized. In this book, we're basically seeing a civilization crumbling due to their own actions, with the remaining survivors not really having an understanding of that and therefore victimizing themselves, leading to them building a superiority complex. It is a very interesting route to take for a kids novel, and it's one that is going to continue to be explored through multiple avenues in the next few books in the series. I personally think Dragon's Nest is the weakest of the books in the Dragons of Deltora series. Not to say that it's bad at all, but I just feel like it spends a lot of time building up the lore rather than exploring much of the themes and details. However, there's so much you can go with the theme of crumbling civilization and victimization, so I don't really blame Emily Rodda for not going too deep into it. So that is Dragon's Nest. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on the next 3 books in this series. But for now, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.